On March the 9th of 2014, Florida teenager Yalyn Galves Don lured her mother, Luz Galves, to the garage of their Ocala home. The woman was met by her daughter's boyfriend, Pedro Solis. Don handed him a knife and he attacked Galves, slashing her throat. Solis also placed the blade to the neck of Don's wheelchair-bound father, Jorge Don Brianes, threatening to kill him as well. In the days leading up to the attack, Don and Solis had plotted over telephone and Facebook to kill the former's parents because they didn't approve of their relationship. In the attack's immediate aftermath, the terrified parents promised Solis to allow him to continue seeing their daughter and thus persuaded him to drive Galves to the hospital. He dumped the woman on the curb and drove off. Galves received emergency surgery and was able to name her attackers, and they were promptly arrested. Don, who was at the time in her early teens, and Solis, who was in his mid-teens, were both charged as adults for attempted first-degree murder with a deadly weapon and conspiracy to commit murder. They faced up to life in prison if convicted. A 2017 update on the case from the Daily Commercial indicated that Don had skipped bail and failed to attend a pre-trial hearing. An arrest warrant was released, but it wasn't clear if the teen was ever found. At the time, Solis remained incarcerated at Marion County Jail, and his case was ongoing. Number 17. LaJuan Jones Jr. In the summer of 2024, LaJuan Jones Jr. surrendered to law enforcement in Pompano Beach, Florida, to face a first-degree murder charge. For a few months, Jones had been living at the home of 44-year-old Keith Brian Poole and was dating his daughter. In August, the older man was made aware of some social media posts made by 18-year-old Jones, which he deemed were inappropriate. The nature of the post was unclear, but an argument erupted when Poole confronted the teen. As tensions escalated, Jones brandished a pistol and shot Poole multiple times outside his residence near the 1500 block of Northeast 28th Street. Jones then fled the area with the victim's daughter and later turned himself into the authorities. As the fatal shooting was being investigated, he was held without bond at Broward County Jail. Number 16. Nicholas Lindsay. Florida teen Nicholas Lindsay was just 15 years old when he was arrested for the first time in 2010 for grand theft in St. Petersburg. In early 2011, he fatally shot police officer David Crawford during a late-night encounter near Tropicana Field. The murder occurred after a local resident reported seeing a suspicious person standing in their backyard with a brick and jumping fences. Crawford was the first officer to respond to the call. He had been shot multiple times by the time a second officer arrived and found him lying on the ground near his patrol car. It would later be revealed that Lindsay shot Officer Crawford while he was reaching for a notepad. Acting on a tip, law enforcement arrested Lindsay and raided his home the following day. At his mother's urging, Lindsay told the truth to interrogators. He was charged with first-degree murder. Lindsay's mother, Deneen Sweat, later told local station WFTS that she urged her son to man up and tell what happened. Both of the teen's parents were in the interview room with him when he confessed to killing Officer Crawford and throwing the murder weapon in a creek afterward. Lindsay's arrest was followed by an intense debate over whether he should be tried as an adult, given the brutal nature of the crime and the fact that he was accused of killing a cop. The mayor at the time, Bill Foster, had once praised the defendant as a troubled youth with the potential to turn his life around, but now wanted to see him tried the same way anyone over 18 would be for the same charge. Under Florida's Law Enforcement Protection Act, this meant that Lindsay would receive an automatic life sentence if convicted. During the trial in 2012, Lindsay's lawyer portrayed him as a scared adolescent and urged the jury to find him guilty of a lesser manslaughter charge. Prosecutors, on the other hand, argued that all 5 of the bullets Lindsay shot struck Crawford, indicating that the teen acted deliberately and with the intent to kill the officer. Lindsay was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. He appealed his conviction and was denied, but continued to fight the case. In 2017, Lindsay's attorneys asked the court to reduce his sentence to 40 years based on newly imposed sentencing guidelines for offenders who committed their crimes as minors. The judge once again upheld the life sentence and said that the court would revisit the possibility of reducing it after Lindsay serves 25 years. In footage from the court hearing, Lindsay didn't appear to be paying much attention to what was going on, and he was even seen grinning when the judge announced the continuation of his life sentence, which many perceived as a disturbing lack of remorse for his actions. Number 15. Dallas Archer. In April of 2014, teenager Dallas Archer was pulled over for speeding in Kingsport, Tennessee, whereupon law enforcement found that she was driving with a suspended license. She was arrested and processed at the local jail, where officers observed that the 19-year-old had hidden something in her crotch. A female officer continued the search in the bathroom and discovered that Archer had concealed a 4-inch long 22 caliber North American arms revolver inside her genital area. The weapon was reported as being stolen in 2013. It was registered to 70-year-old retired car salesman John Souther and had been taken from his 1994 Mustang while the vehicle was parked outside a Kingsport home. In the fall of 2015, Archer pleaded guilty to smuggling contraband into a police facility under a plea agreement. She also admitted marijuana possession, driving without a license or proof of insurance, vandalism, and failure to appear. Archer was jailed for 3 years in addition to being ordered to complete 3 years of community service and 2 years of probation. When asked why the young woman had concealed the mini revolver inside her body, her lawyer said, "I have never got an answer for that. I don't know. I think it's just because she was high." Number 14. Tyrone Brian. British thug Tyrone Brian was so infamous for his violent behavior and his tendency to stab people that he went by the street nickname Red Alert. He already had a lengthy criminal record with multiple prior weapon-related convictions when he stabbed 19-year-old Archie Beston to death in February of 2020, leading Beston's loved ones furious that he was free to kill the victim in the first place. On the night of the murder, Brian and his friend, 21-year-old Finley Awan, were out celebrating Brian's 20th birthday in South London when they got into a fight with 19-year-old Fabian Davis outside a nightclub. Awan got into his van and drove straight toward Davis, leading the club's doorman to believe that they were watching a terrorist attack in progress. Brian then stabbed Davis 3 times before plunging the knife into Beston's heart. Davis survived his injuries and Beston died nearly a week later. Beston didn't know his killer, according to his mother, Becky, who insisted that her son was merely in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that he paid for his life for this innocent and unknowing mistake. The fact that Brian and Beston had no known prior connections and that Beston was sober at the time of his death only furthered the growing sentiment among the public that Brian should have been in prison for his past offenses when the murder occurred. During one of his previous crimes in 2017, Brian had stabbed a man in the kidney, proving that he had the capacity to gravely harm another human being, but he will not be hurting any more innocent civilians anytime in the near future, because he's currently serving a 19-year prison sentence for manslaughter, great bodily harm, robbery, and various other charges in connection with several different crimes. Number 13. Hytajada and Kenley Alston. 52-year-old Nadia Vitels went to check on her vacant apartment in the New York City borough of Queens in early 2024 and never returned, prompting her concerned son to contact the police for a welfare check. In what can only be described as a scene from a horror movie, officers found her murdered body in a duffel bag inside a closet at the residence. Vitels had been beaten to death by a pair of teenage squatters, later identified by law enforcement as 18-year-old Kenley Alston and 19-year-old Hytajada. Investigators identified the accused killers using surveillance footage, which showed the pair leaving the building after Vitels was seen entering. By the time police arrived at the scene, they had fled in the victim's Lexus. Prior to her murder, Vitel's had been planning to move into the empty unit as part of her efforts to start a new chapter in her life. She had just returned to the Big Apple from a trip to Spain and was completely unaware that anyone had taken up residence in the apartment or that they would kill her for coming to check on the place. An autopsy revealed that she had suffered a brutal death with blunt force injuries to her head, a brain bleed, 2 broken ribs and multiple facial fractures. U.S. Marshals captured Hytajada and Olon in Pennsylvania, where they had used Vitel's credit card to buy a diamond engagement ring, a PlayStation, and other items. The pair were initially taken into custody on charges of receiving stolen property and were subsequently charged with second-degree murder. They are currently being held without bond as they await trial. Number 12. Charles Garon III. Nakisha Hodges Hawkins was just 4 days away from her 18th birthday when she attended a party in her hometown of Michigan City, Indiana, in July of 2011. Her father, Calvin Hawkins, allowed her to attend the bash but had an instinctively bad feeling that something was going to go wrong that evening. Unfortunately, he was right. Over 150 people were present at the gathering when gunfire broke out, causing the crowd to disperse in a panic. Nakisha and a young man named James Sanders were fatally shot, and witnesses were quick to implicate a suspect named Charles Kemp in their deaths. But Kemp was both a longtime friend of Nakisha and one of the shooting victims who survived. When detectives visited him at the hospital, he told them where he had hidden his gun on the night of the shooting. They retrieved the weapon, and it did not match with the ammunition that was used in the crime, officially ruling Kemp out as a suspect. During the early stages of the investigation, one partygoer identified a teenager named Charles Garon III as the shooter, claiming that they witnessed him firing the bullets that killed the victims. But the testimony of just one person was unlikely to secure a murder conviction, and the case languished as law enforcement failed to procure a similar story from any other witnesses. In the meantime, Nakisha's family struggled to cope with the lack of answers surrounding the young woman's murder. In 2016, 5 years after her death, Calvin Hodges uncovered some new potential information on social media. Based on the comments, it seemed like many people knew exactly what had happened that night. But when Calvin turned the details over to the police, they failed to take action, telling him that there wasn't much they could do based on hearsay. Desperate to see justice served, Calvin stood outside the police station daily and live-streamed his frustrations to a growing audience on social media. His emotional videos garnered tens of thousands of supporters, and people even began to join him outside the police station. Acting under the mounting pressure from the public, the local police chief assigned the case to a new team of detectives who pleaded with the public to come forward with the information they needed to bring the killer to justice. A new witness revealed that she had seen Charles Garon commit the shooting, and having more than one person willing to testify to this served as a cornerstone with the prosecution's ability to pursue a case against him. The original witness, who had implicated Garon years earlier, was initially hesitant to cooperate. He claimed he didn't remember much from the night of the shooting, despite what he had initially told law enforcement, but he eventually agreed to testify, and both witnesses took the stand at Garon's trial. Justice finally came in 2017, when a jury found Garon guilty of Nakisha's murder. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison, finally giving the slain young woman's loved ones an opportunity to properly mourn her passing and to rest assured that her killer was being held accountable for his actions. Number 11. Daniel Haig. In October of 2021, a high school student named Justin McLaughlin was fatally stabbed in broad daylight at a railway station in the Scottish city of Glasgow. He had just celebrated his birthday a few days earlier and was on his way home from McDonald's with his friends when they encountered Daniel Haig and one of his buddies, who shouted a rude comment about the neighborhood that the boys lived in. The two groups briefly exchanged words before Haig reapproached McLaughlin and stabbed him in the heart. McLaughlin collapsed on the platform and cried out for his mother. as his friends rushed over to comfort him in his dying moments following his arrest for McLaughlin's murder. Haig insisted that he only meant to injure the victim, not to kill him. He claimed that McLaughlin and his friends had charged at him when he pulled a knife from his backpack and made the regrettable decision to use it. Even Haig's friend begged him not to do anything stupid with the blade, but he unwisely chose to ignore the advice. After stabbing McLaughlin, Haig threw the weapon into a garbage can and fled the scene on foot, instead of trying to get help for the dying teenager. Haig admitted that he was responsible for McLaughlin's death but denied a murder charge. He apologized for his actions in court and claimed he felt remorseful but was nevertheless found guilty as charged and sentenced to 16 years to life in prison. Number 10. MasonCIS. MasonCIS was in his early teens when he committed a crime that a judge described as ghastly, disturbing, and draped in unmitigated evil. On September the 2nd of 2019, Sisk armed himself with a handgun and executed his entire family at their home in Elkmont, Alabama. The victims were Sisk's father, John, and his stepmother, Mary, along with their children Grayson, Colson, and Aurora. All of them died after being shot in the head. Sisk initially told the police that he'd been playing video games in the basement when he heard gunshots in the house. He claimed to have seen a vehicle pulling away when he rushed to check on the commotion. Following extensive questioning from Limestone County Sheriff Mike Blakely, Sisk admitted that he'd murdered his family. On an audio recording that was played during a pre-trial hearing, the teen suggested that he'd done so because of frequent fighting in the household. He said, "They argue a lot, and I got fed up with it." Prosecutors described the teen as having anger issues and repeatedly threatening his family in the lead-up to the shooting. Evidence suggested that he tried to kill his stepmother in the past by lacing her coffee with peanut butter, knowing she was severely allergic. In April of 2023, Sisk was convicted of multiple counts of capital murder. Because of his age at the time of the massacre, he was ineligible for the death penalty and was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In a report from late 2020, Sisk's juvenile probation officer wrote that he never showed any sign of remorse for his crimes. In the sentencing's wake, Limestone County District Attorney Brian C.T. Jones released a statement about Sisk, part of which read, "I've prosecuted a lot of people in my career, and I can tell you that out of all those people, only 4 scare the hell out of me, and he's at the top of my list." Number 9. The murder of Urant Setseg Serendorj. 49-year-old Urant Setseg Serendorj was fatally stabbed in the neck by a teenager while on her way home from work in Dublin, Ireland's financial district, in January of 2021. Following the incident, the young killer was charged with murder. According to police, the suspect was on a brazen crime spree on the evening of the fatal stabbing. Prior to plunging a knife into Serendorj's neck, he reportedly robbed innocent civilians of their phones and cash. The defendant already had a lengthy criminal history dating back to the age of 12, with his first offenses consisting of antisocial behavior at public transit stations. He had previously been charged with various assaults, thefts, and robberies before he was accused of murder, and his crimes became increasingly violent as he entered his teens. After killing Serendorj, the suspect went on to rob another female victim who screamed for help as the young man snatched her phone. He slashed his knife toward the woman, who was extremely lucky to avoid any serious injuries. Police identified the stabber several hours later and arrested him the following night. During his trial, the defense argued that the young man was born addicted to heroin and that he barely knew his biological parents, who were both addicts. Roughly 18 months before the stabbing, the teen ran into his mother in the street. She introduced herself to the boy and tried to give him a hug, but he refused, at which point the woman allegedly became abusive. Following the chance encounter, the teen developed a drug addiction in order to cope with the grim reality of his upbringing. While there's no doubt that the accused killer suffered through a disadvantaged childhood, the court did not see this as an excuse to rob and kill innocent strangers. The teen admitted to manslaughter, but the case went to trial and he was convicted of murder. He was sentenced to 13 years to life in prison, which means that he could be paroled in his 20s, and his subsequent attempt to appeal his case failed, leaving him stuck behind bars for the time being. Number 8. Macy Marie LS. On August the 10th of 2024, Instagram model Macy Marie LS ran a red light while driving her Mercedes on North Miami Avenue in Miami, Florida. The 24-year-old was traveling at around 57 miles per hour but then floored her accelerator, reaching nearly 80 miles per hour. She crashed into a Range Rover, launching it and her Mercedes into a silver Suzuki sedan carrying 3 people heading to work. A passenger riding in the rear of the latter vehicle was killed on impact, while the driver, Abraham Ishmael, had to be extracted from the wreck. He too succumbed to his injuries in a local hospital. His wife, Juanita Hernandez, suffered non-fatal injuries, as did the Range Rover driver and Lathers herself. The young model tried fleeing the scene in the collision's immediate aftermath but was stopped by witnesses. When law enforcement found her, Lathers was vomiting and admitted to being under the influence of pink cocaine, also known as 2C, a ketamine-based synthetic drug. According to an arrest report, Lathers claimed she was from the future and had a crystal ball. She subsequently appeared before a judge in a garment designed to prevent self-harm and pleaded not guilty to charges of vehicular homicide, reckless driving, driving on a suspended license, and leaving the scene of a crash. During the hearing, a judge called the model an absolute danger to the community. She was placed on house arrest with a GPS tracker after posting a $26,000 bond. The case was ongoing as of the latest updates, with another hearing scheduled for September of 2024. Number 7. Eura Varus. Teenagers Charlie Cossa and Eura Varus were both at a party at a remote farmhouse in Warnham, West Sussex on July the 23rd of 2023. They went to the same school but didn't know each other before attending the event alongside over 100 other youths. At some point during the night, Varus was reportedly asked to leave after he'd become intoxicated and behaved inappropriately towards a young woman. Varus, who was described as a big lad, became aggressive. He brandished a knife and a fight broke out on the crowded dance floor as the song Toxic by Britney Spears blared over the speakers. During the scrimmage, Varus knifed Cossa multiple times. Witnesses would recount seeing the attacker drenched in blood and hearing him say, "I've stabbed someone." Cossa was subsequently found lying on the grass with blood pooling around him. He'd suffered a critical wound to his aorta, the heart's main artery, and went into cardiac arrest on his way to the hospital. The teen died 2 days later, but the murder weapon was never found. Varus, whom the victim's mother described as pure evil, stood trial and was found guilty of murder. In June of 2024, he was jailed for life with a minimum of 17 years behind bars. Number 6. Jjn Bernett. On October the 14th of 2022, 2 groups of teens became involved in a brawl while on the A train in Far Rockaway, Queens, New York City. A video obtained by the New York Post showed them swinging wildly at each other before a single gunshot rang out. It wasn't clear from the footage who'd fired the weapon. Seconds later, teenager Jjn Bernett was seen lying motionless on the floor while a woman was heard screaming frantically. Bernett had been fatally shot in the chest. 18-year-old Keandre Russell was arrested for murder and other related charges the following day. A grand jury, however, would only indict him for weapons possession, tampering with evidence, and menacing. Through his lawyer, Russell maintained that he was actually the victim and vehemently denied having a gun on him during the incident. He claimed that he didn't even know Bernett and accused him of instigating the brawl by aggressively approaching him and his girlfriend. In the footage moments before the shooting, a female teenager clad in a 2-pieced red tracksuit was seen relentlessly punching a male teenager. Her role and allegiance in the conflict was unclear. Russell was also shot during the fight, and the bullet that claimed Burnett's life was believed to have passed through his leg. The prosecution described the killing as gang-related, and Russell remained the prime suspect, but he denied having any criminal affiliations. As of November of 2022, the teen was incarcerated at Rikers Island, with the judge setting his bail at $750,000 in cash or a $2 million bond. In a video interview, Russell told the New York Post, "I didn't commit no crime and I don't belong here." Number 5. Sweet and Sour Senselessness. A petty dispute between two teenage girls over a McDonald's sweet and sour sauce packet erupted into deadly violence during the early morning hours one day in August of 2023, leaving one young woman dead and another behind bars. The incident began outside a McDonald's restaurant in Washington, D.C. at around 2 o'clock in the morning when one girl snatched another girl's sauce packet. During the melee that ensued, 16-year-old Naima Ligon and her friend began beating up another female. Surveillance footage reportedly showed that the girl initially refrained from fighting back, only to approach Ligon as she was getting into a car and stab her with a 7.5-inch blade. Ligon succumbed to her injuries and the unnamed suspect was charged with first-degree murder. She initially pleaded not guilty, but eventually took a plea deal and admitted to a reduced charge of voluntary manslaughter while armed and carrying a dangerous weapon. The youthful offender was sentenced to the maximum of 5 years in a juvenile detention facility and will be released when she's 21 years old, which means that she'll still have a full life of freedom ahead of her if she manages to avoid further trouble with the law. The victim's mother, Joy Liggins, told the Washington Post that on the night of the murder, Naima had missed her curfew, turned her phone off and disabled her phone's location finder. Joy stayed up all night at the family's Maryland home, unaware that her daughter had been mortally wounded and waiting to confront the teenager over her rebellious behavior. At the killer's sentencing hearing, Judge Andrea L. Hertzfeld described the incident as an all-around tragedy, further remarking that the perpetrator gutted and stabbed the heart of her very own friend. Number 4. Noel Reid. In October of 2020, a British teenager named Noel Reid went on a deranged mission to stab as many people as possible, nicknamed the Devil for his cruelty and ruthlessness on the streets. His frenzied stabbing spree began as a search to find a man who he believed had interfered with his drug-dealing business. 27-year-old former British Army cadet Keegan Crimes had no involvement in Reid's criminal activities, but was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time when he fell into the crazed teen's path of destruction. Reid stabbed Crimes in the heart outside a convenience store in Winsford, Cheshire. He then plunged the knife into a bystander who tried to intervene as Crimes bled out on the sidewalk. The witness survived, but Crimes succumbed to his injuries. Reid fled the scene and later posted a photo of himself with devil horns and the words "R.I.P. Keegan" on Facebook, showing a disturbing lack of remorse for his actions. The sarcastic behavior continued even after Reid's arrest for Keegan's murder. In court, he could be seen blowing kisses at his supporters and throwing up gang signs, showing not even a morsel of regret over his actions, which took an innocent man's life. Reid denied murdering Crimes despite his obnoxious behavior, which many perceived as an indication of his guilt. He argued in court that he was a little boy lost, but failed to garner the jury's sympathy and was found guilty of the murder charge, landing him a 19-year prison sentence. While imposing the punishment, the judge described Reid as one of the most dangerous teenagers he had ever come into contact with during his 40-plus years working in the justice system. He accused Reid of attempting to set himself up as a ringleader of Winsford's drug trade, noting that there seemed to be no limits to the level of violence that the teen killer was willing to inflict on others in order to establish a reputation as a local kingpin. Number 3. James Alex Fields Jr. and Daniel Bordon. From August 11th to the 12th of 2017, a rally was held in Charlottesville, Virginia, meant to unite various white nationalist movements and to oppose the proposed removal of the statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee from a local park. The Unite the Right rally would be marked by several outbursts of violence. On August 12th, 20-year-old James Alex Fields Jr. deliberately drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters. 32-year-old Heather Heyer was killed and dozens others were injured. At the state level, Fields was found guilty of first-degree murder, hit and run, and 8 counts of malicious wounding. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to 29 federal hate crime charges. He was given life in prison plus 419 years for the state charges, with an additional life sentence for the federal charges. Also on August the 12th, in another incident, a photographer captured the moment that protesters with various melee weapons, mainly clubs and poles, attacked a fallen black man. He was identified as aspiring musician DeAndre Harris, who'd gathered at the scene with several of his friends to counter-protest the rally. He denied initiating the physical alteration and later recounted, "The KKK and white supremacists just rushed us." The brutal beating left Harris with 8 stitches in his head, a broken wrist, lacerations and a chipped tooth. Among those charged in connection to the attack was Ohio teen Daniel Bordon. The 18-year-old was arrested for malicious wounding in his home state and then sent back to Virginia. Bordon had reportedly been obsessed with Nazis since his junior year of high school. Cincinnati station WCPO reported that he'd once threatened a classmate with a knife, drew swastikas on him and called him Jew Boy. About a year after the attack on Harris, Bordon entered an Alford plea, acknowledging that a jury would have had sufficient evidence to convict him of malicious wounding. He was given a 20-year sentence, but most of it was suspended, with the custodial term set at 3 years and 10 months. Today's topic was requested by Miss 1171 and Cali Girl living in Nevada 8. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. The Murder of Reena Ver. High school was a difficult time for socially awkward Canadian teen Reena Ver, who grew up in Saanich, British Columbia. There wasn't much she wouldn't do to fit in, and she was thrilled when some troubled girls from a local group home befriended her. It wasn't long before Reena began to rebel against her parents in an effort to secure her standing among her new group of friends who were fascinated with gangsters and tried to emulate the lifestyle. She began smoking cigarettes and marijuana, drinking alcohol, and running away for days at a time, hoping to eventually become a member of the gang her crew was trying to establish. When Reena failed to return home one evening in November of 1997, her parents assumed that she had simply run off again, but they began to worry when Reena failed to at least let them know where she was, which was out of character. When more than a few days passed with no word from the teen, her family reported her missing. Just like Reena's parents had initially assumed, the police quickly concluded that the young woman was a runaway, but the family insisted that this wasn't the case. They believed that something bad had happened to Reena, and with enough prodding, law enforcement eventually began to take the case seriously. 8 days after Reena vanished, her murdered body was found in a shallow part of the Gorge Waterway tidal inlet. By then, investigators had narrowed their sights on Reena's friend, Nicole Cook, who they believed had something to do with the teen's disappearance. According to the local grapevine, Cook had conspired with her right-hand woman and fellow gangster wannabe, Kelly Ellard, to attack Reena as revenge for spreading nasty rumors about Cook during a low point in their friendship under mounting pressure from the police. Witnesses revealed that Reena was attacked by several people, including Cook and Ellard, during a party under a local bridge. The deadly assault began with Cook extinguishing a cigarette on Reena's forehead. She and a handful of other partygoers proceeded to viciously beat Reena, while everyone else looked on, failing to intervene or summon the police. Others fled in a panic, but still failed to alert the authorities to Reena's imminent need for help. Reena was still alive when her attackers left the scene. Security footage showed her limping out from under the bridge, but Kelly Ellard and a young man named Warren Paul Glowatsky were lying in wait nearby with plans to finish what they had started. After beating, burning, and bludgeoning Reena, earlier that evening they drowned her and made a pact to keep their horrific actions a secret. Perhaps not surprisingly, however, most of the suspects, except for Kelly Ellard, eventually cracked under pressure and owned up to their role in Reena's death. 7 teenagers were convicted of criminal charges in connection with Reena's murder. Warren Glowatsky and Kelly Ellard were both found guilty of murder and received the harshest sentences of life, with the possibility of parole. Glowatsky was paroled in 2010 after serving 13 years and has expressed deep remorse for his actions. Ellard was granted day parole in 2017, but waived her right to a hearing for full parole in 2022. The parole board reviewed her case anyway and concluded that she was not ready to fully reintegrate into society. Coming up right after number 1, we've got more insane cases prepared for you, so stick around for our release of When Trust in Your Gut Goes Wrong, coming right up. Number 1. Jake Coupe in Warwickshire, England. In September of 2023, a British teenager named Jake Coupe and a friend went out into public with plans to stab a young man who they were entangled in a rivalry with. The pair live-streamed part of a conversation about their intentions while searching for the victim in Tapping Way. Coupe and his buddy eventually found their target, walking in the street with his friends. According to law enforcement, Coupe bludgeoned the victim in the head repeatedly with a hammer, causing him to collapse onto the ground. Coupe was also accused of chasing one of the victim's friends with a Rambo-style knife before running from the scene with his unnamed accomplice. After falling onto the ground, the victim began convulsing. His friends ran for help and he was rushed to the hospital, where doctors placed him in an induced coma. Fortunately, he managed to avoid suffering severe brain damage as a result of the attack. Police located Coupe's co-conspirator at his home during the early morning hours. Coupe turned himself into the authorities at Leamington Police Station later that day, and both suspects were charged in connection with the assault. In early 2024, Coupe pleaded guilty to causing grievous bodily harm and possession of an offensive weapon. He was also found guilty of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and received a 5-year prison sentence. Coupe's accomplice pleaded guilty to possession of a bladed article and was found guilty of conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. He was sentenced to 4 years in custody. On November the 25th of 2013, Michelle Rowling posted the following message on her Facebook status. If anything happens to me tonight, just let my kids know I loved them dearly and tell my mama I love her. Those close to the 25-year-old knew the ominous post indirectly referred to her ex-boyfriend, who'd been released from jail that day. 25-year-old Montrell Cooper had reportedly been behind bars since August, when he was accused of assaulting Rowling. The latter's inkling that the end of her life was near proved eerily prophetic only a few days later. Police were called to the woman's apartment in East St. Louis, Missouri, for a report of a domestic disturbance. Responding law enforcement found Rowling suffering from multiple stab wounds. The young mother of 2 was taken to a nearby hospital but never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead on arrival. Thanks in part to the victim's prescient Facebook status, detectives immediately knew which lead to pursue at the onset of the investigation. In the wake of the murder, Cooper had gone on the run in a black SUV that was later found abandoned. Shortly thereafter, he turned himself in to the East St. Louis police and was held in custody on a $200,000 bond. The man ultimately pleaded guilty to the crime, and in March of 2017, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Number 5. Shaya Shadu. Shaya Shadu had just boarded Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 when she phoned her husband Hassan, saying she'd had a premonition that the plane was doomed to crash. The civilian flight was due to depart from Tehran, with its destination set as Kiev. Shadu posted a selfie to Instagram detailing her fears for the plane's safety amid rising tensions between Iran and the US following the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani days earlier. Shortly after takeoff on January the 8th of 2020, the Boeing 737 endured artillery fire from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The plane was struck by a pair of surface-to-air missiles and was consequently shot out of the sky. All 176 passengers and crew members were killed. In the immediate aftermath, Iranian authorities denied any responsibility for the aircraft's destruction, instead blaming mechanical failures. However, further investigation by U.S. intelligence and defense officials called Iran's claims of innocence into question. The Americans asserted their belief that the plane had been shot down based on evidence from recon satellite imagery and radar data. Within a few days, the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran admitted to their involvement. They claimed to have mistakenly identified Flight 752 as a hostile target. In March of 2021, the Civil Aviation Organization of Iran released its final report on the matter. The report faced backlash from some foreign officials who viewed it as a collection of manipulations, the goal of which is not to establish the truth but to whitewash the Islamic Republic of Iran. Number 4. Aisha Hassan. At about 6 a.m. on May the 19th of 2022, East London woman Aisha Hassan was viciously attacked by her husband while their children were waiting to be taken to school. When first responders arrived at their Canning Town flat, they found the 34-year-old in a pool of blood in the kitchen. She'd suffered a myriad of stab wounds and had also sustained a fractured skull. The victim's husband, Asim, openly confessed to the killing, telling police at the scene, "I'm guilty and you can charge me." The couple had reportedly had an Islamic marriage, but by 2022 their relationship was in dire straits. They often argued about money, Asim's erratic behavior, and his insistence that Aisha was having an affair. In the days leading up to the incident, Asim joined a Muslim dating app and messaged another woman about meeting up. He allegedly desired 2 wives, another point of considerable contention with Aisha. Just days before her death, the woman had sent a chilling WhatsApp message to friends saying, "If something happens to me, please take care of my kids." Although Asim admitted to stabbing his wife 26 times, he denied murdering her. Nevertheless, in April of 2023, he was found guilty of murder following court proceedings at the Old Bailey. Number 3. Xavier Thomas. French couple Christine Delcroix and Xavier Thomas crossed the London Bridge on their way to the Shard on June the 3rd of 2017. They'd arrived in England from France that morning and spent much of the day sightseeing. After resting at their hotel for a bit, they set out to experience the view from the top of the landmark skyscraper. Delcroix was uneasy about walking over the bridge and expressed as much to her fiancé. Her anxiety reportedly stemmed from the attacks that had occurred in the UK earlier that year, namely the vehicle and knife attack at Westminster in March and the bombing at Ariana Grande's Manchester concert in late May. The woman later said she'd had premonitions of such an atrocity unfolding again. Delcroix wanted to turn back, but Thomas insisted they continue to their intended destination. Shortly before 10 p.m, a white Renault Master made a U-turn at the northern end before driving southbound back across the bridge. The man proceeded to mount the pavement a total of 3 times, colliding with multiple pedestrians at high speed. It ultimately crashed on Borough High Street, after which the vehicle's 3 occupants got out, armed with knives, and continued their attack on foot. They killed 5 people near the Borough Bistro pub. Witnesses later reported that the attackers were shouting, "This is for Allah," during the course of the onslaught. In the end, a total of 11 people lost their lives, including the 3 perpetrators, who were ultimately gunned down by police. Another 48 individuals were injured, with 21 left in critical condition. Among the fatalities was Thomas, who was identified as the first victim of the attack, for which the Islamic State later claimed responsibility. His body was recovered from the Thames 3 days later. During an inquest at the Old Bailey in May of 2019, Delcroix told the court about the premonitions she'd experienced prior to the tragedy. Number 2. Emma Kelty. Following the death of her father in 2014, British woman Emma Kelty resigned from her position as headmistress at Knollmead Primary School in Surbiton in order to travel full-time. In January of 2017, she spent 54 days in Antarctica, becoming the 6th woman to ski solo to the South Pole. Kelty also reportedly hiked the 2,650-mile Pacific Crest Trail in the United States. In a blog post from February the 1st of 2017, the adventurous woman announced her next expedition. She planned to kayak the 4,000-mile-long Amazon River, beginning in Peru and concluding once she reached the Atlantic Ocean. To prepare for the intense journey, which she was to undertake alone, Kelty took a self-defense course at London's Russell Square and began whitewater training. She also spent a few weeks kayaking in Slovenia before traveling to Lima, Peru in mid-June. At some point during the course of her perilous solo trek, Peruvian authorities found a dead body near the city of Iquitos. The deceased individual was initially identified as Kelty. The woman's family was notified of her purported death and started the process of making contact with the British Embassy in Peru. However, an American whitewater kayaking guide who had encountered Kelty early on in her trip sent a message to her on her GPS device. Much to the guide's surprise, Kelty replied, confirming that the dead body had been mistakenly identified as hers. She joked that the mix-up might be a premonition of something bad that was going to happen to her, but nevertheless continued on her journey, eventually making it to Brazil. Then, a couple of weeks after being erroneously declared dead, Kelty set up camp on a beach near the small riverside community of La Rosodre. Unbeknownst to the woman, that area was known to be crawling with pirates and Colombian drug traffickers. A group of 4 men described as gangsters and drug users spotted Kelty's tent and mistook it for a drug smuggler's camp. They shot at her from a distance, hitting her in the arm. The men subsequently ambushed her, cut off her hair, and demanded to know where the drugs were. Kelty denied possessing any drugs, so one of them slit her throat, after which she was abused by all 4 assailants. They dumped her lifeless body in the river, and it was never found. A total of 5 young men were ultimately arrested and prosecuted in connection with the gruesome crime. Just 2 weeks after hearing that Kelty was dead, her family received the same agonizing news again, but this time it was true. Number 1. David Klinger. David Klinger had dreamt of becoming a police officer since his early childhood when he was a self-described beach kid in Miami. At the age of 13, his parents got divorced, so he moved with his mother and 2 sisters to California. His ambition to enter the law enforcement field remained, but as he would reveal in a memoir decades later, he wasn't without certain reservations about the job. Klinger reportedly experienced premonitions as a teen, causing him to become convinced that he would eventually have to kill in the line of duty to protect someone. In 1981, Klinger's lifelong dream finally came true. He graduated from the police academy and officially became an LAPD officer. 4 months out of the academy, Klinger and his partner, Dennis Azevedo, were dispatched to the scene of a burglary in South Central Los Angeles. A male spectator observing the crime scene as it was processed was asked to vacate the area, but he refused. 33-year-old Azevedo subsequently approached a man later identified as Edward Randolph. The latter, an ex-con, pulled out a butcher's knife and stabbed the officer directly in the chest. Azevedo's protective vest fortunately prevented the blade from penetrating his body. Klinger came to his partner's aid but was unable to disarm Randolph. He pulled out his service weapon and fired a bullet into the suspect's chest, killing him. It would later come to light that Randolph had harbored a passionate hatred for the police and had allegedly planned to kill the next officer who bothered him. Klinger stayed on the force for just over another year after the incident. Following the end of his law enforcement career, the man became a professor in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Thanks for watching. Would you rather stop aging or have a limitless amount of money? Let us know in the comments section below.